Hi, my name is Matthew Remski, and I'm looking forward to coming out to Edmonton this coming January 11th to the 13th to Empowered Yoga. I'll be facilitating a YTT module in yoga philosophy, history, and culture. And my host, Michelle Thioret, suggested that I do a little preview of the content for the weekend. So here it is. Although I'll be reading from notes, I'd usually screen share, but it looks like YouTube isn't allowing people to do that now. So I might not make perfect YouTube eye contact. The content for the weekend really shuffles down into three topic areas. On Friday, we do a lot of discussion of method and process, including how we actually define subject, the term yoga, the practice yoga, what yoga communities are, what yoga traditions are, how diverse it is. Is there anything that unifies the culture? Uh, those questions will be carefully looked at, and they're not easy. And one of the cool things that emerges is a difference in approaches to the way in which we answer. Do we answer personally and subjectively, or do we answer from a broader, more professional perspective that allows for the real diversity of the culture to shine through? This brings up questions of scope of practice. What gives me or anybody the right or the education or the authority to speak on these matters? And I think scope of practice is something that's becoming a little bit more clear in the physical sciences or the physical studies of modern postural yoga, but the scope of practice that I'll be discussing on Friday is really what qualifies us and how we are limited in discussing the humanities part of yoga studies. So that involves looking at types of evidence and where we get our sources and how honest we are about what we know and what we don't know. And wrapped up in that is notions of positionality as well. What kind of access do we have to the things that we're talking about? And all of those things really tie into navigating the issue of cultural appropriation in yoga, which is something that we'll touch on as well on that Friday evening. So a lot of method and process work on the Friday that I think opens the door to the content that we start looking at on Saturday and Sunday. And the main bits of content that I want to try to communicate is, first of all, a firm understanding of the timeline of eras that yoga history expresses or shows itself through. And that goes from the earliest mentions of yoga practices and yogic type figures within the oral literature known as the Veda, all the way up to what we see on Instagram today. And my special focus in this is really on how the body is conceived of and portrayed and spoken about and felt. There's a big difference between the ascetic body of the Yoga Sutras and the heroic body of the Bhagavad Gita and the experimental alchemical body of the Hatha Yoga period, and then, of course, the modern bodies that we see coming into focus now, bodies that express various types of empowerment or recovery from trauma, or also in a darker way, bodies that express a kind of lack of groundedness in contemporary political climates. So I look at yoga history in that part of the content over the weekend, really through the lens of the body. And also, I should say that I provide lots of resources, both online and in terms of research papers that I distribute to all participants. So it's not like you have to catch everything while you're there. There's a lot of slides that I use. There's a lot of visual aids. There are journaling questions. So I use a number of methods to engage the learning content. And if everything doesn't get absorbed over the weekend, that's not surprising at all. You have a lot to go away with. The last bit of content that occupies the weekend really is ways in which we can look at um, two different texts, very different texts. So, a doorway into reading the Yoga Sutras and a doorway into reading the Bhagavad Gita. And not just reading them, but also uh, resourcing the literature that surrounds these books and ways in which they've been interpreted and used throughout history by various yoga practitioners. Um, Now, you might be familiar with some of my more popular work, some of my more controversial work. And that means that during these weekends, a number of questions always come up. And I want to assure you that, yes, I will speak to them, time permitting. Questions like, what about adjustments in the history of modern postural yoga? What about abuse in yoga communities? I do a lot of research in that area and a lot of writing and some journalism. What about yoga cults? How would you know that you were in a yoga cult? What does it feel like to be in a yoga cult? What is a yoga cult? What is this thing that Theodora Wildcroft, Dr. Wildcroft, now we can say, is talking about when she talks about post lineage yoga? And how does yoga intersect or not intersect with the values of social justice, let's say? How is yoga expressive or not expressive of the values that we actually hold politically and socially? So those are very, vibrant, prickly, contentious questions, and my goal always is to hold really good space for discussing and exploring them. And I'm not giving you answers, but really helping you to refine your questions. That's a little bit hard given how opinionated I am, but I do my best. So that's all. That's all I have to say. I hope to see you on the 11th to the 13th. I think this little preview will also be good for other events, so maybe I'll just repost it later on as well. I hope you've had a great new year and break, and you're ready to plunge back into rich and curious learning.